Look at this filthy outfit, huh? Sorry for bringing someone from a rundown factory like this. I had been dragged to a group date by my high school classmate, Stanley. His purpose? To make me the scapegoat, showing off in front of the gathered beauties by belittling me, standing there in my work clothes. Do your best to make me look good while I land one of these gorgeous flight attendants, okay? By the way, there's no seat for you. I wasn't even allowed to sit, becoming the target of mockery, just like back in high school. And then, this guy? He grew up in a shabby factory and still had the nerve to dream about becoming a pilot. Talk about not knowing your place. Even the dream I once held dear was cruelly trampled underfoot. But then, it happened. Captain, why are you here? What? One of the beautiful women in the group spoke those words, revealing the truth. In that instant, the tables between Stanley and me turned completely. My name is David, 32. Phew, there, that's done. I wiped the sweat beading on my forehead with my fist. The clanging of metal echoed in the garage, and the smell of engine oil filled the air. Dressed in a grease-stained work uniform, I was polishing a classic American car. David, pass me the wrench. Hearing the voice from beneath the car, I reached for the toolbox and handed over a wrench. Here, Dad. Thanks. His gruff tone hadn't changed a bit over the years. As I handed him the wrench, I looked down at his face. Sweat glistened on his brow, and his hands, deeply lined with age, bore the marks of a lifetime of experience. My father worked silently, focusing on the task at hand. He had run this auto repair shop next to our home since before I was born. Now, I spend my days helping him out here. After a while, my father spoke again. As expected, it was in his usual curt tone. It's good you came back. Ha! I couldn't hide my surprise at those words. He hardly ever says thank you. I never expected him to say something like this. You've aged, Dad. Mom too. I didn't realize how much, with me being so caught up in work and barely coming home all these years. For the past decade or so, I had hardly returned, too busy with my own life. Helping out now was my way of trying to make amends. And then, David. Was it really okay for you to quit that job? Ah. The truth is, I had just switched jobs recently. There is a little downtime before my next job starts. During that time, I'd been helping my mother with housework and assisting my father with car maintenance. Didn't I tell you? Actually, just as I was about to explain about my new job. Excuse me. A loud voice echoed through the garage. I froze, startled by the voice, my body tensing up instinctively. This voice, could it be? There you are, David. As soon as the person spotted me, they barged right into the garage without hesitation. The closer they came, the faster my heartbeat raced. Stanley. I muttered his name bitterly under my breath. The man in a sleek, expensive-looking suit smirked in that same audacious way he always did. Even his laugh hasn't changed one bit. Long time no see, David? I'm glad you still remember me. So it's true you came back to town? Yeah. There was no way I could forget him. He was Stanley, a high school classmate. Stanley glanced around the garage and sniffed the air exaggeratedly. Ah, yeah, this smell takes me back. David, in garages, some things never change. You haven't changed either, Stanley. Ha ha. I get that a lot. People still say I look like I'm in my 20s. Yeah, I meant you haven't matured at all since high school. A wave of exhaustion hit me, and I let out a deep sigh. So, what do you want? Don't tell me you came here for car repairs. Of course not. I've got a good deal for you, David. For me? I narrowed my eyes in suspicion as Stanley clapped both hands on my shoulders. I'm taking you to a group date. What? A group date? Don't tell me you don't even know what that is? I know what it is, but... Then it's settled. No sooner had he said that than Stanley grabbed my shoulder, spun me around, and started pushing me forward forcefully. Hey, wait! What does settled mean? That you're coming along, of course. Honestly, we just couldn't find enough guys. You're just there to make up the numbers. What do you mean? I couldn't believe he'd just show up out of nowhere and start making ridiculous demands. I was on the verge of snapping. Dealing with Stanley was already hard enough given our complicated past. Turning around forcefully, I shoved his hands off me and said firmly, "Sorry, but I'm busy. Just leave already." But then, "Go with him, David." What? It was my father who spoke, completely unexpectedly. "It's already time to wrap up. I'll let your mother know you don't need dinner." What are you saying, Dad? Why is he taking Stanley's side instead of mine? Before I could even ask, my father quickly left the garage and headed to our family home next door. This can't be happening. As I stood there in a daze, Stanley grabbed my shoulder again. A sly grin spread across his face. "Your dad seems like a reasonable guy. I bet he's worried about his over 30 son who still hasn't gotten married. Just leave me alone. Anyway, I'm not going to some group date. Even if you say that the Redwood is the venue?" What? Hearing that name stopped me mid-sentence. Stanley noticed my reaction and grinned even more mischievously. "You know it, right? It's Tiffany's family restaurant." "Yeah, Tiffany." Just hearing her name made my heart race. "Looks like you've changed your mind." "Oh, and that outfit is fine as it is. It actually works better this way." Stanley's voice sounded distant, almost like it was fading into the background. My thoughts had drifted back to memories of Tiffany. "David, would you like to eat together?" Her voice was so vivid, like she was standing right in front of me. I could clearly remember her smile, too. Tiffany was, to me. That was more than 10 years ago. Back when we were still in high school. "Hey, David. What's on the menu for lunch today? Something fancy?" As soon as I stepped out of the classroom, I heard that sarcastic voice. That, too, I can clearly remember. When I reluctantly turned my gaze, I saw Stanley standing in the hallway, grinning. Stanley's father was an executive at a local company, and he loved to show off, always surrounded by his entourage. On the other hand, I was, "Oh, no packed lunch today? Don't tell me you're so broke now you can't even afford rice to pack." "I just left it at home." I shoved past Stanley and bolted down the hallway. Behind me, his laughter and that of his cronies echoed loudly. Back then, my dad's factory was struggling. Even though my mom worked part-time to help, money was always tight. Sometimes, I'd tell Mom, "I don't need a lunch today, I'm too busy to eat." I knew that she often skipped her own lunch to make sure I had one. On days I didn't bring a lunch, I'd spend the lunch break killing time in the library. On days I did bring one. "Oh, look at that, there's even a topping today. Pretty fancy for you, David." Stanley and his crew would purposely come over to my desk and peer into my lunchbox. To avoid their teasing, I'd always eat with my arms shielding it from view. David's family really is dirt poor. "I bet you won't even be able to afford those toppings soon." Stanley would deliberately raise his voice, and the classroom would erupt in laughter. "Stanley, if that happens, maybe you should buy him some. Without any toppings, the smell might be unbearable." "Totally. He always smells like old grease. It's the stink of a rundown factory." Stanley's cronies burst into laughter again. I clenched my fists tightly on my lap. I should have been used to their mockery by now. But it still stung, no matter how much time passed. And then, one day, I was dreading opening my packed lunch again, knowing Stanley and his group would swarm over to mock me. With my head down, I just waited for the time to pass. "David, would you like to eat together?" "Huh? Startled, I looked up. Standing before me was one of my classmates, Tiffany. She was beautiful, intelligent, and had a bright personality. On top of that, her family owned a prestigious, long-established high-end restaurant. She was the class president, admired by everyone, and the undisputed queen of the social hierarchy. We'd never spoken before, but there she was, holding up her lunchbox toward me. Why? My mom packed way too much food. I can't finish it all, so I thought maybe you could help me? Before I could fully process her words, she opened her lunchbox. It was a little larger than most girls' lunchboxes. Inside, it was packed with a variety of colorful side dishes. It was almost like, it looks like, a picnic. The words slipped out, and Tiffany broke into a bright, crinkly-eyed smile. Doesn't it? It's kind of embarrassing. So, will you help me out? Why me? Even as I hesitated, I couldn't take my eyes off her lunchbox. It was so beautiful and appetizing that I couldn't even feel envy. Sure, I guess. Thank you. Beaming, Tiffany quickly pulled her chair over to my desk. That day, Stanley and his group stayed far away from me. The dishes Tiffany shared were so delicious, they practically melted in my mouth. The next day, and the day after that, Tiffany kept coming over, saying, "There's too much food again." Before I knew it, eating lunch together had become our daily routine. Then, one day, "I'm sorry, David." "Huh?" I paused mid-bite to see Tiffany looking downcast. I'd been pretending not to see what Stanley and the others were doing to you. I knew they were saying awful things, but I didn't have the courage to step in. I'm really sorry. It was the same for the other classmates, too. But Tiffany was the only one who had the courage to reach out and talk to me when I was isolated. And then, it wasn't true, you know. The thing about my mom packing too much food. I asked her to do it on purpose. I thought if I sat with you, Stanley and the others might leave you alone. Tiffany had been bringing a big lunch every day just for my sake. In truth, I was the one being helped all along. Tiffany, thank you. But now, I really look forward to it. Eating lunch with you is my favorite part of the day. Her face lit up with a bright, radiant smile. From that moment on, I began to see her as someone special. David, what's your plan after graduation? One spring day, after advancing to our senior year, my dad asked me that question. I gave him a vague answer. I'm still thinking about it. I often helped him with his work after school and on weekends. Watching him repair cars had always been something I admired, something that made me proud. But deep down, Dad, I'm sorry. I don't think I can take over the shop. I had loved going near the local airport since I was young, standing close enough to see the planes take off into the sky. Year by year, that fascination grew stronger and stronger. I want to be up there, flying planes too, I'd think. Hey, I heard you want to be a pilot. Stanley somehow caught wind of my dream. As usual, he showed up with his entourage, smirking as he approached me. There's no way you can pull that off. What? Have you even looked into how much pilot school costs? We're talking millions over 4 years. No way your broke factory working dad can afford that. I knew it all too well. That's why I hadn't even told my parents about my dream. We were barely scraping by, and I wasn't even sure if college would be possible. Stanley leaned in closer, driving his point home as I clenched my fists under the desk. Too bad, huh? If you became a pilot, you might have had a shot at Tiffany too. I couldn't say anything. Both are way too big for a poor guy like you. Just give it up already. Stanley doubled over with laughter. Hearing his words, his followers joined in and started laughing as well. The rumors spread like wildfire through the school, and soon everyone was mocking my dream, saying it was impossible. But amidst all that, you want to be a pilot, David? That's amazing. So cool. Tiffany was the only one who didn't laugh. On the contrary, she supported me with all her heart. Tiffany, why aren't you laughing? Like everyone else. David. She didn't answer my question. Instead, she turned her back to me. I think I'll become a flight attendant. What? If you're a pilot and I'm a flight attendant, then maybe we can stay together, even when we grow up. She turned back to me with a shy, radiant smile. In that moment, Tiffany became my first love. The time we spent together became a cherished memory, one that would never fade, no matter how much time passed. Hey, David. What are you spacing out for? Whoa. I was jolted back to my senses by a hard slap on the back, and before I knew it, we were already standing right in front of the redwood. An ancient wooden gate and moss-covered stone paving greeted us. The old wooden gate, moss-covered stone path, and seasonal flowers at the entrance. The soft glow of lanterns and the imposing, historic single-story wooden structure radiated over a century of tradition. It was definitely not the kind of place where you'd show up wearing dirty work clothes. I really shouldn't be here. Come on, the girls are already inside. You don't want to keep them waiting, do you? Hey, wait. Just as I turned on my heel to leave, Stanley shoved me from behind, forcing me into the redwood. Tiffany. I might finally get to see her again after so long. With that anticipation came a sense of inferiority, feeling out of place, and, well, a whirlwind of emotions swirled inside me. Hey, sorry for the wait. When we arrived at the reserved room, Stanley greeted the women inside with a cheerful wave and a confident smile. Good evening. Nice to meet you. Looking forward to tonight. Waiting for us were 3 women. Each of them was a stunning beauty with an elegant and glamorous aura. Stanley leaned close to me, his grin dripping with smugness. Talk about lucky, David. They're all current flight attendants. What? My heart skipped a beat. Of all people, why did it have to be them? What's wrong, David? Stanley noticed my unease and his smirk widened. Oh, I get it, you're nervous. Not surprising, since someone like you would never get a chance to meet flight attendants otherwise. He was clearly enjoying himself, openly looking down on me. Stanley took his seat confidently across from the women and pointed at me with a theatrical gesture. This guy here is David. Sorry about his dirty clothes, but hey, what can you do? He's the son of a rundown repair shop owner. Poor guy doesn't even own a decent outfit. The women exchanged uncertain glances, clearly uncomfortable. Stanley, emboldened by their reactions, jabbed me lightly in the leg with his elbow, still smirking. Come on, David. Don't make them feel awkward. Introduce yourself. Tell them you're a broke 32-year-old bachelor with no prospects. I mean, I felt so bad for you, I decided to invite you along. So, do your best to keep the conversation lively and make me look good, okay? Especially since I'm aiming to bag one of these beauties tonight. In that moment, I realized why I was here. Stanley had brought me along to make himself look better by comparison, to use my appearance as a foil for his own polished image. By the way, I work for that Blossom Holdings. You know it, right? The super famous, massive corporate group in New York. Oh, and this? It's a gift from my dad to celebrate my new job. Can you believe it? It cost $10,000. David, how many times your annual salary is that? Boasting about his job, bragging about the watch he was wearing. And on top of that, Stanley kept putting me down while shamelessly showing off to the beautiful women. For some reason, I still hadn't been offered a seat. Oh, don't sit down in that filthy outfit. You'll ruin the cushions. If you want to sit, do it in the hallway. And make sure to clean up after yourself, use that grimy work uniform as a rag while you're at it. Hey, David, say something, will you? Oh wait. You probably don't know what to say. You've spent your whole life crawling under cars, right? Sorry, ladies. But he's a lowly educated man with zero social skills. As I tried to sit, Stanley blocked me, laughing loudly. Then, listen to this, ladies. He had the audacity to dream of becoming a pilot. Imagine that, a poor guy like him wanting to fly planes. Now look at him. Isn't it hilarious? Stanley burst into even louder laughter, clutching his stomach as if it were the funniest thing he'd ever heard. At that moment, "Excuse me." One of the women raised her hand with a calm but authoritative demeanor. Her single word instantly changed the mood in the room. "You're Captain Williams, aren't you?" "What?" Stanley froze, his mouth agape. Before he could respond, the women erupted into excited chatter. "Really? I thought so. Two of you." "I thought so too." The three of them leaned in close, squealing with excitement in high-pitched voices. Then, the first woman who raised her hand stood up and, "Please, have a seat here, Captain Williams." She took my arm and smiled warmly. At that moment, Stanley's jaw practically hit the floor. "Captain? You're a captain? Oh, so you didn't know?" Surrounded by the admiring women, I revealed the truth to Stanley. That I hadn't given up on my dreams. That I had achieved them. I had become a pilot. I trained through my airline's internal program. Internal program? That's right. I couldn't afford to attend a pilot academy, so I pursued it after joining an airline. Some airlines train their own pilots. The company I joined was one of them. After graduating college with the help of scholarships, I worked in the maintenance division while studying and training. It wasn't easy, not by any stretch of the imagination, but even with my family's financial struggles, I managed to become a pilot. And now, I can't believe we're meeting like this, with the youngest captain in company history, no less. You were promoted after flawlessly handling that nightmare flight, the one with the bad weather, engine trouble, and the captain's illness. Your skill is legendary in our company. And didn't a major international VIP specifically request your flight once? The women took turns sharing stories about me, their excitement palpable. Stanley's face turned ashen. He stared in stunned silence, unable to believe what he was hearing, though the women's sincerity left no room for doubt. One of them, the first to speak, leaned in close and whispered into my ear. "David, do you remember us?" Sorry, honestly, not at all." I figured. "Huh? Well," she said with a wry smile, "we're not flight attendants, we work on the ground as airport staff." Stanley had overheard they were airline employees and assumed they were cabin crew. The women had simply chosen not to correct him. We thought being flight attendants would make a better impression on him, so we let him believe it. "Got it. But everyone at the company knows you, David. You're a superstar." The other two women joined her, crowding around me in excitement. "Rachel, you're so sneaky, hogging David all to yourself." "I'm Courtney, by the way. Every girl at the company is crushing on you, David, but you never come to any of these group dates. So we're super lucky you showed up today." "I'm Madeline." The three of them competed to introduce themselves and share just how much they knew about me, their chatter dizzying. Meanwhile, Stanley sat alone, utterly forgotten. Actually, I know your boss personally." He tried, grasping for a way to rejoin the conversation. "But, that's nice. Sorry, we're talking to David right now. We've heard more than enough from you earlier, Stanley." Dismissed coldly by all three, Stanley found himself ignored completely. Mouth agape, he could only sit in stunned silence. Eventually, unnoticed by anyone, he quietly slinked away. "Excuse me for a moment." I was completely exhausted, so I took a moment to stand up when I saw an opening. As if escaping, I left the room and started walking down the hallway, thinking I might as well stop by the restroom. "David?" A voice called out from behind me. I turned, and as soon as I saw her, I knew her name. Tiffany, is that you? Yes. It's been a while, David. The one smiling with narrowed eyes was Tiffany. You came back to town. I had no idea. Yeah. Suddenly, I felt self-conscious and looked down. Compared to the elegant Tiffany standing before me, I felt entirely out of place. Sorry for showing up looking like this. I was dragged here without any warning. No need to apologize. Tiffany shook her head, her smile unwavering. We welcome all our guests, regardless of their attire, at our restaurant. Her polite tone and the slight bow she gave showed just how much she had embraced her role. She had truly become the proprietress of this esteemed inn. Her deep navy kimono was immaculately styled, and her hair was perfectly arranged without a strand out of place. The girl I hadn't seen in over a decade, my first love, had grown into a beautiful, mature woman. Seeing her now, more poised and stunning than ever, made my heart race uncontrollably. Thank you, Tiffany. David. We spoke at the same time. Our voices overlapped, and that was the moment. David. Hey, where have you gone? A loud voice calling my name grew closer from the other end of the hallway. And then. David, there you are. I was looking everywhere for you. The woman, spotting me at last, rushed over and clung tightly to my arm. Wait. You're Rachel, right? You remembered my name. That makes me so happy. Yes, it's Rachel. Her cheeks were flushed, and the strong scent of alcohol lingered. She must have drunk quite a bit while I was gone. Still clinging to my arm, she looked up at me with a wide grin. Then, she leaned in closer, pressing herself against me even more. Come on, let's drink some more, Captain. Captain. The quiet murmur came from Tiffany. Her smile was gone, and her expression was unexpectedly stern, almost angry. You became a pilot? Yeah. I did, actually. I see. Tiffany lowered her gaze for just a moment, but then quickly lifted her head. By that time, the smile had already returned to her face. Congratulations, David. Thanks. David, come on. Let's go back. Everyone's dying to hear more of your heroic stories. Rachel's loud voice cut through our conversation as she tugged insistently on my arm. Wait, hold on. Her pull made me stumble, almost losing my balance. Oh no. Are you okay, David? I'm fine. Thanks. Rachel's quick reaction had kept me from falling, but we ended up closer than I'd intended, with her holding onto me tightly. Sorry. I'm good now. I quickly stepped away to create some distance, only to hear a deliberate clearing of the throat behind me. Please keep your voice down in the hallway so as not to disturb other guests. Tiffany's gaze was fixed directly on Rachel. Being reprimanded, Rachel scowled and glared back. What's your problem? I'm a guest too, you know. That attitude is so rude. Well. Sorry about the noise, Tiffany. Let's go, Rachel. Wait, David. Don't leave me. Sensing the tension rising, I quickly decided it was best to leave. As I was walking away, I glanced back. See you again, David. Tiffany was gently waving her hand at me. Yeah. See you. A few days later. Feeling a bit nervous, I stepped through the gate of the Redwood. This time, I wasn't in my work clothes. I had dressed properly in a shirt and slacks. Phew. All right. Taking a deep breath, I slid open the heavy wooden door. And then. Welcome to, David. Tiffany's cheerful voice filled the entranceway. Today, she wore a light green kimono and, with her face glowing, she came running over to me. You came. Well. I said see you again, didn't I? Though my response came out a little brusquely, Tiffany simply smiled warmly. Welcome to the Redwood. We will do everything to ensure your visit is delightful. She bowed gracefully, every movement exuding the refined elegance of a seasoned proprietress. She's so beautiful. I found myself mesmerized until she straightened up again. Our lunch recommendation is the Redwood Special Tasting Course. Sounds great. I'll have that. Certainly. Please wait just a moment. Tiffany disappeared into the back, and I took a seat at the counter, letting my eyes wander around the restaurant. It was a place steeped in history, yet it didn't feel outdated. Every detail spoke of thoughtful care and pride in tradition. The old me wouldn't have even been able to set foot in here. Thinking about that, it somehow feels deeply emotional. From someone mocked for his poverty to someone who could walk into a place like this confidently. This is a good place. I should bring my mom and dad here sometime, before I start my new job. Thank you for waiting. Tiffany returned shortly, carrying a tray with my meal. Please enjoy your meal, she said, bowing slightly. But instead of leaving, she suddenly turned back to face me. Actually, I was just about to have my lunch. Would it be alright if I joined you? Ah. The words struck a familiar chord in my heart. Back then, when I was lonely, she was the only one who reached out to me. The memories from that time came flooding back all at once. As my chest gradually filled with warmth, I nodded. Yeah. Of course. What followed felt like stepping back in time. We shared the delicious food, talking and laughing together, just like we had years ago. I never imagined I'd get the chance to share this kind of moment with Tiffany again. David, you're amazing. You made your dream of becoming a pilot come true. When I suddenly paused my chopsticks, Tiffany gave me a soft smile. Come to think of it. When I gave up taking the pilot training school exam, Stanley and the others laughed and said, "We knew it." But she were different. She was as disappointed as I was. Congratulations, David. I know it's a bit late, but somehow I feel really happy too. Thank you, Tiffany. I felt a lump rise in my throat. To cover it up, I changed the subject. I've heard you're working really hard too, Tiffany. Yes. Tiffany's expression darkened slightly as she quietly set down her chopsticks. Then, almost to herself, she murmured, I have to give it my all. I'm the one in charge here now. The former owner of the Redwood, Tiffany's father, passed away suddenly from an illness during her senior year of college. Because of that, Tiffany had to abandon her dream of becoming a flight attendant. She had even secured a job offer from a major airline, her dream almost within reach. I couldn't just leave my mother, who was completely lost, and chase my own dreams. Of course, it was painful, giving up on them, but still. Shaking her head gently, Tiffany picked up one of the small bowls. How does it taste, David? Huh? Oh, it's delicious, of course. Just like when you shared some with me back in the day, sophisticated, but somehow so familiar. Hee hee, thank you. That's why I don't have any regrets. The dishes passed down through generations of this restaurant hadn't been lost with her father. Now, customers could still enjoy them. Thanks to her efforts. Tiffany smiled at me as if to say, I made the right choice when I gave up on my dream. I see. David? This strength. Looking back now, I realized that her strength was what had drawn me to her all those years ago. I took a deep breath, collecting myself. Tiffany, by the way, now I'm. It was at that moment. I noticed Tiffany's expression had clouded over once again. I always thought I could keep protecting this place forever. Huh? Look, David. As she said this, she looked back behind her. The empty restaurant, devoid of any customers except me, stretched before us. I went against everyone's advice and started offering affordable lunches, thinking it would help. But as you can see, this is the result. Maybe 1 or 2 more years, at best. Tiffany. The decline in business guests and tourists who used to support this restaurant. The aging staff, including the head chef who had been working here since her grandfather's time. The skyrocketing cost of ingredients. Tiffany listed one issue after another, painting a picture of the challenges the Redwood faced. It's so quiet, isn't it? Paying salaries has become difficult, so during lunch hours, it's just the head chef and me. There's no need for anyone else, that's how few customers we have. With a deep sigh, Tiffany lowered her gaze. Under the counter, her clenched fists trembled slightly. She hadn't given up yet, but having tried everything she could think of, she felt cornered. Her frustration was palpable, and it squeezed at my chest too. Tiffany, is there something I can? I was about to say it. And then. That's why I said, I'll handle it somehow. Suddenly, a voice rang out from behind us. When we turned around, standing there was none other than Stanley. I'm the only one who can help you. That's why you should belong to me. Haven't I told you that before, Tiffany? Grinning smugly, he raised his prized wristwatch. As if to show it off to me and Tiffany. What are you saying? I believe I already made it very clear that I refuse. Tiffany said, her voice overlapping with my shocked exclamation as she rose from her chair. Looking straight at Stanley, she firmly repeated herself. I really appreciate that you visit the restaurant so often. But that and this are entirely different matters. I have absolutely no intention of dating you. Oh, really? For a brief moment, Stanley's expression twisted with frustration. But it was quickly replaced with his smirking grin as he let out a mocking laugh through his nose. Are you sure you want to take that attitude with me? What? I'm the top rising star among the young employees at the headquarters of the world-famous Blossom Holdings. Even Mr. Sullivan trusts me deeply. And we're close enough to spend time together privately. So, if someone like me were to say, it's better to stop going to the Redwood, what do you think would happen? As Stanley's grin grew darker and more sinister, the color drained from Tiffany's face. I couldn't stand it any longer and rose to shield her. Stop it, Stanley. Oh, you're here too, David? Thanks for stopping by to support my Tiffany. Really appreciate it. Cut it out. It wasn't hard to piece together from their conversation. Stanley was exploiting Tiffany's concern for the Redwood's future to pressure her into dating him. And Tiffany clearly despised it. In that case, I spread my arms wide, glaring at Stanley. Leave, Stanley. Get out of here. What? Stay out of this, you outsider. You're just a broke, lonely guy who can't even bring customers here. Ah. The moment Stanley yelled at me. A small gasp came from behind him, and another figure appeared. It was Stanley. You startled me with that loud voice of yours. Rachel. It was Rachel, one of the members from the group hangout we'd had recently. She worked as a ground staff member. David, it's been a while. I've missed you so much. Rachel beamed at me. But when her gaze shifted to Tiffany, her expression darkened, her eyes narrowing with a sharp glare. I came here to declare war on you. Declare war. I don't care if you're his old classmate or whatever. I won't lose. I'm the one David will choose. What? Rachel. While we stood there stunned, Rachel let out an exaggerated sigh. Then, turning to Tiffany, she delivered another shocking remark. Stop trying to manipulate David with your pity. It's disgusting. What? You're acting all close to him, even though our most beautiful flight attendant couldn't win him over. I bet you've been playing the brave and hardworking woman card to make yourself seem special. Or, maybe you're just throwing yourself at him because he's a pilot? As those contemptuous words left her lips, a derisive smile followed. In that instant, I felt a quiet but burning rage engulf me, like a fire threatening to consume my entire being. Rachel! A deep voice, one I couldn't believe was my own, escaped my throat. If you insult Tiffany any further, I will never forgive you. Eek. Rachel paled instantly, her face contorting in fear as she stepped back. I glared at her intensely. Then, Stanley stepped between us. Now. Let's call it a day, Rachel. I'm sure David will come to understand that you're serious. All right. Stanley patted Rachel's shoulder and turned on his heel. I thought he'd head straight for the door, but as he left, he turned his head back towards me. Too bad, David. Just because you managed to become a captain doesn't mean you can save Tiffany. There's no way you can draw enough customers to save the redwood. Remember this, Tiffany, I'm the only one who can help you. Soon enough, you'll come crawling to me, begging, please, make me yours. Stanley let out a booming laugh, wrapping his arm around Rachel's shoulder as they left. His words were nothing short of a declaration of war against us. I'm sorry for dragging you into this, David. As she walked me to the front door, Tiffany slumped her shoulders in dejection. I wanted to comfort her, to place my hand on her shoulder, but I restrained myself and shook my head. I'll come again. What? But Stanley and the others will come back anyway. If they do, I'll face them head on. Besides, more importantly, the food here is amazing. Anyone who tries it once will definitely want to come back. As I crossed my arms and nodded confidently, Tiffany's eyes welled up with tears. She pressed her fingers to the corners of her eyes, her expression breaking into a smile. Thank you. I think I understand why so many women are drawn to you, David. What? You're so kind, and on top of that, you're a captain. Maybe even at work, girls are competing for your attention. That's not true. I shook my head in a panic, vehemently denying her claim. That's completely wrong. I don't even have a girlfriend. Really? That's such a shame. But is there anyone you're interested in? I turned my back to her and started walking toward the gate. Probably. I'll never get married. What? 2 weeks passed after that. Between helping my parents and preparing for a new job, I made time to visit the redwood frequently. Each time, I savored their incredible food while keeping an eye on how things were going. The flow of customers hadn't changed, and Tiffany's face often carried a shadow of unease. Thank you, as always, David. But every time I came, her smile was enough to warm me from the inside out. Since that day, Stanley and his crew hadn't shown up, leaving us at ease. Then, one evening, I happened to pass by the redwood while running errands. At that moment, that's it. This could work. I had a meeting scheduled with a client for my new job. Why not hold it at this restaurant? It felt like a great idea, so I decided to stop by. Sliding open the front door, I froze in my tracks. The usually quiet interior was bustling with noise. What's going on? Tilting my head in curiosity, I stepped inside, and Tiffany, who had been rushing around the hallway, noticed me and came running over. David! It's rare to see you here at this hour. What's up? Actually, I came to make a reservation. But what's going on? Everyone looks so busy. Well, we just got a big party reservation for the first time in a while. 30 people, can you believe it? 30 people. I couldn't help but raise my voice. With a party that large, it might help alleviate the redwood struggles, even just a little. But why did Tiffany look so uneasy? Just as I had that thought, I overheard voices from the back of the restaurant. This is great. We can finally breathe easy for a while. Seriously, I thought we were done for. Looks like we won't have to worry about our paychecks either. Their voices were filled with joy and relief. Everyone must have been worried about the redwood's financial troubles. But still. Tiffany, is something wrong? What? You don't look too happy about this. Is there a problem? After a brief silence, Tiffany looked down and answered in a quiet voice. Actually, The reservation was made by Stanley. What? The moment I heard his name, alarm bells went off in my head. Was he planning to use this favor to manipulate Tiffany again? For a moment, I thought about declining. But everyone was so excited about it. I just couldn't say no. Tiffany's voice trembled. She must have sensed Stanley's ulterior motives. But with the Redwoods' dire financial situation, she couldn't reject the reservation based solely on personal reasons. As the proprietor, she had no choice but to accept it. The event is just a week away. I need to get everything ready quickly. When Tiffany looked up, she wore a brave face but smiled faintly, without her usual energy. Was there anything I could do to help her? That thought crossed my mind when, a week from now? That wouldn't happen to be on Friday, would it? Yes. Stanley's reservation is for Friday at 7 p.m. Actually, I was planning to make a reservation for Friday as well. Huh? Tiffany's face suddenly lit up with surprise and hope. Really? Yeah. I don't have nearly as many people as Stanley, but that doesn't matter. For the first time, Tiffany gave me her usual cheerful smile. I felt relieved until she said, "Thank you, David. I'm so happy." My heart skipped a beat. Tiffany had taken my hand and squeezed it tightly. "Oh. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "No, it's fine." So, next Friday at 7 p.m., a private room for two. Sound good? Feeling awkward, I quickly made my way out of the Redwood, leaving Tiffany behind with her bright smile still etched in my mind. With a resolute determination burning in my chest, I'll keep an eye on Stanley on the day of the reservation. If he tries anything with Tiffany, I'll stop him. But when the day finally came, I wasn't able to make it in time. By the time I arrived at the Redwood, it had already happened. Stanley's banquet was set to begin at 7 p.m., the same time as my reservation. Planning to arrive early just in case, I headed to the Redwood a little after 6:40 p.m. Outside, heavy rain had been falling since dusk. The hem of my suit was soaked through. What? The moment I stepped through the gate of the Redwood, I couldn't believe my eyes. "What are you doing out here?" In front of the entrance, a woman in a dress was standing alone. In this heavy rain, she wasn't even holding an umbrella, standing there all by herself. As if her soul had completely left her body. "Hey! Tiffany!" I dropped my umbrella and ran toward her, my feet splashing across the wet stone path. As I got closer, her appearance became clearer. Her normally neat hair was disheveled and plastered to her face by the rain. Her shoulders trembled uncontrollably, and her soaked kimono hung heavily on her slight frame. "Ah!" She turned her head toward me, but her eyes seemed distant, unfocused, staring into the void. "What happened? Why are you out here like this?" "David." In a faint, raspy voice, Tiffany called my name. Just that alone was enough for me to realize that something serious had happened. "Because." "What?" "Just now, I got a sudden phone call." Her voice, small and fragile, was nearly drowned out by the relentless rain. Piece by piece, her trembling lips revealed the truth. Today's reservation was cancelled. Stanley said so. "What?" I froze, the breath catching in my throat. But the look on Tiffany's face told me there was more, something even worse. And then, he said, "If you don't want rumors spreading, marry me." What do you mean, rumors? He said he could make up anything he wanted, that we caused food poisoning or that our banquet hall was unsanitary. Anything to ruin us. Tiffany hung her head, her shoulders shaking even harder. Everyone worked so hard for today. We got the best ingredients we could find, cleaned every corner of the banquet hall. I did my best too. Tiffany. David. I have to protect this restaurant. Raindrops mingled with the tears streaming down her face, her voice breaking as she spoke. Through her tears, Tiffany forced a weak, broken smile. At that moment, I realized the decision she had made. If I give him the answer he wants, he said he'll reverse the cancellation. That's not an option. Before I knew it, I had grabbed her shoulders tightly. Tiffany, she was seriously considering marrying Stanley. Stunned, I appealed to Tiffany. That's enough, Tiffany. You can't sacrifice yourself. But there's no other way. Even so. A storm of emotions raged in my mind. Anger toward Stanley. Sadness and frustration radiating from Tiffany. But above all else, it was the fury I felt at myself for failing to protect Tiffany and for not coming up with a way to help her. Damn it. I bit my lip hard, unable to contain my frustration. And then, well, if it isn't David. What are you doing here with my fiancée? That grating voice, so familiar and so infuriating. I turned around, and there he was, Stanley. That smug, malicious grin on his face was more obnoxious than ever. Stanley, you are. I instinctively moved to shield Tiffany, standing protectively in front of her. But then. Oh, poor David. Heartbroken, are we? Maybe I should be the one to comfort you. Rachel appeared from behind Stanley, her tone dripping with mockery. Tiffany, if you marry me, I'll start gathering people for the restaurant right now. Stanley grinned triumphantly as he addressed Tiffany. Right now. So that reservation, it was a lie? Tiffany's trembling voice echoed painfully amidst the sound of the rain. Her already pale face, chilled by the rain, turned even paler. Of course it was. Stanley shrugged, not even attempting to hide his shamelessness. It was all part of my plan to win you over. They say all's fair in love and war, don't they? In that moment, my anger boiled over. Stanley! I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. But Stanley ignored me entirely, continuing to speak to Tiffany. I've fancied you since high school, you know. But no matter how much I tried to get your attention, you never noticed me. It was like I didn't even exist to you. Yes. That's because you were. Was it because of him? Tiffany gasped, her breath catching. Stanley's finger pointed straight at me. And then, Stanley added even more words to shake Tiffany emotionally. If you choose me, I'll host more banquets here. Regularly, too. What? I work for one of the top companies in the country, you know? I can organize team outings, client dinners, you name it. It'd bring in plenty of revenue. Don't you want to save this restaurant, Tiffany? That's... Stop it. I shouted as I lunged at Stanley. You know she can't say no, you coward. Ha! You're one to talk, David. Stanley swatted my hand away with a smirk, chuckling derisively. As I furrowed my brows, wondering what she meant, it happened at that very moment. Stanley is right. The cold, chilling tone that reached my ears pierced straight through my chest. Which one of us is the real coward here, I wonder? Rachel. With a thin smile on her lips, Rachel stared at me. I checked with a friend who works as a flight attendant. David, you quit our company a month ago, didn't you? And yet, you're still pretending to be a captain. What a liar. What? Behind me, Tiffany let out a small gasp. Rachel, as if savoring her newfound leverage, began walking toward me slowly. She must be so disappointed, don't you think? Finding out the real you is unemployed. David, is that true? Each word she spoke felt like a wedge, driving deeper into the gap between Tiffany and me. No, Tiffany, that's not it. Don't worry, David. I'd be willing to accept even someone like you. Good for you, David. Looks like we're all headed toward happiness, huh? The words I hurried to say in my defense were cut off by Stanley and the others. Between the two of them who were slowly approaching me, Tiffany's gaze darted around in confusion. caught between wanting to believe in me and being forced to doubt me. How long are you going to hide behind that liar? Come over here, Tiffany. As Stanley reached out toward Tiffany, he suddenly seemed to have an idea. He rolled up the sleeve of his left arm and checked his watch. Oh, look at that, it's almost 7 p.m. At this rate, the banquet really will be cancelled. 7 p.m.? I muttered almost to myself, drawing everyone's attention. What did you just say, David? Oh. I straightened my posture, lifting my head to meet Stanley's gaze head-on. You're going to regret everything you've done to Tiffany, Stanley. What? What nonsense is this, you loser? Stanley's mocking words were abruptly cut off. It was because, all of a sudden, a car stopped in front of the gate of the Redwood. Through the pouring rain, a sleek black luxury car slid to a stop. The door opened, and out stepped an elderly man in traditional Japanese attire, his white beard neatly trimmed. What's all this commotion out here in the rain? The man, holding his subordinate's arm for balance while carrying a fine umbrella, approached us steadily. He stopped just a few steps away, his authoritative presence filling the space. You'll catch a cold standing out here. Come inside quickly. Ah, I'm sorry. There's been some complications. Me and the old man, chatting in a friendly manner. Seeing that, Stanley's expression changed rapidly. You're kidding. Mr. Sullivan? Stanley stumbled back, his voice filled with disbelief. The old man turned his sharp gaze on Stanley, scrutinizing him. Do I know you? Then, he turned toward me. Do you know this man, Captain? Captain? Rachel's voice shot up instantly, as though she had uncovered a new vulnerability. Pointing at me as if she had discovered a new weakness, she burst into laughter. David, are you lying to this old man too? You haven't been a captain in ages. You're so shameless. Shut up. The one who shouted wasn't me, it was Stanley. What's wrong, Stanley? Don't call him an old man. This is none other than Mr. Sullivan of Blossom Holdings. What? Rachel's eyes widened in shock, leaving her speechless. Yes. The elderly man standing before me is none other than the head of one of the nation's leading conglomerates, Blossom Holdings, Mr. Sullivan. And he was also the very person I was scheduled to meet here at the Redwood. What's going on? How does David know Mr. Sullivan? Stanley clutched his head, unable to make sense of the situation. Now that Mr. Sullivan had arrived, it was time to clear things up. It's true that I quit the airline where Rachel works a month ago. Naturally, I also stepped down as captain. But I did it, to become a captain. What? Stanley looked up, his face frozen in shock. What's going on? Tiffany murmured from behind. Mr. Sullivan took it upon himself to explain. It was about 6 months ago. I happened to be on a flight where he was the captain. We encountered severe turbulence. But his exceptional skills brought us safely to the airport. I was deeply impressed by his piloting abilities. Watching Mr. Sullivan speak with a dreamy look in his eyes, I, too, am reminded of those days. Immediately after the flight, Mr. Sullivan sent an enthusiastic request to my airline. I'd like to hire Captain Williams as my personal pilot, he had proposed, offering an unmatched deal. The offer persisted for 3 months, and after much deliberation, I accepted his terms. I now work for a company backed by Mr. Sullivan. They specialize in private jet manufacturing and pilot services. I'm currently a captain for private jets. What? That's impossible. Stanley and Rachel were listening to our words with stunned expressions on their faces. So yes, it's true that I'm still a captain. I hope that clears up the misunderstanding. Yes. I turned to see Tiffany, her expression a mix of surprise and relief. When she gave a small nod, a wave of reassurance washed over me. The thought of her believing I was a liar had been the most painful thing of all. I look forward to flying with you someday, Captain Williams. be sure to stay in top shape for the occasion. That's why he shooed us toward the redwood, telling us to go inside. Once Tiffany opened the door, Mr. Sullivan turned to face Stanley. "And who are you supposed to be?" I've heard rumors about someone claiming to be close to me, a young man who bears quite a resemblance to you." "Ah." Even from a distance, it was clear that Stanley's face was draining of color. Mr. Sullivan gestured to his secretary, who promptly pulled out a tablet and began searching for information. And then, in less than a minute, "His name is Stanley." "Gah!" When the secretary turned the tablet toward Mr. Sullivan, Stanley's shoulders flinched noticeably. "He works in a regional branch of Blossom Holdings, not the headquarters. He's part of the sales department, where his performance consistently ranks at the bottom. Apparently, his father, Kenneth, an executive, frequently intervenes to resolve issues he causes." How do you know all that?" Stanley's voice trembled as he staggered, pale and shaken. It was now abundantly clear, Stanley wasn't a rising star at Blossom Holdings, nor was he trusted by Mr. Sullivan. The real liar, the shameless fraud, was him. When you manage tens of thousands of employees, people like you are bound to appear, those who weave lies to inflate their own image. Such individuals are the least deserving of trust. Mr. Sullivan. Even in a regional office, it's intolerable to have someone like you tarnish the name of Blossom Holdings. I don't want to see your face ever again." In an icy tone, he said that to Stanley, and finally, Mr. Sullivan spat out his words with disdain. "You'd best start looking for a new job." "No way." Stanley's face lost all its color as he collapsed onto the wet cobblestones, falling to his knees. "You kept me waiting." Slicing through Stanley's presence with a sharp remark, Mr. Sullivan approached us at the entrance, where we were drying our hair. "And then, my apologies." He bowed deeply toward Tiffany. "No. Please, raise your head. It seems someone from our group has caused you trouble. Isn't that right, David?" "Of course, Mr. Sullivan. You see right through everything." I summarized for him what had happened before he arrived at the inn. Hearing this, Mr. Sullivan's face grew more serious, and he bowed even deeper than before. "I deeply apologize." "May I offer my apologies on that man's behalf?" "Oh no, there's no need to apologize. Tiffany." Once Mr. Sullivan decides on something, he never backs down. Just like how he insisted on making me his personal pilot. But, looking troubled, Tiffany glanced back and forth between Mr. Sullivan and me. Realizing I was right, she finally nodded with a resigned understood. "Thank you, ma'am. Now, to avoid canceling the banquet, let's gather people immediately." "What?" "I'll call some acquaintances myself. There's an airport nearby, isn't there? Some of my old colleagues work there." "Oh. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. And thank you, David." Tears welled up in Tiffany's eyes as she bowed deeply to us. When she raised her head again, she had regained the gentle smile I knew so well. 30 minutes later, the Redwoods banquet hall was filled with nearly 100 people. Those who couldn't fit in the hall packed other private rooms and the counter, making this the busiest night for the inn in over a decade. "David, thank you so much. See you later." Of course, the staff was in chaos. Tiffany, as the proprietor, bustled back and forth across the inn, managing everything. With beads of sweat glistening on her forehead, she looked radiant and joyful. "I'm glad for you, Tiffany." Feeling happiness well up in my chest, I stepped outside to the entrance for some fresh air to clear my head. And then, whoa! You scared me. I almost jumped in surprise. Because a figure emerged faintly from the darkness, staring straight at me. Standing by the gate with soaking wet hair was Rachel. David. Her tense expression softened when she noticed me approaching. The harshness she had shown when she was with Stanley was nowhere to be seen. I'm sorry, David. Under the night sky, now clear of rain, her trembling voice sounded fragile. I thought you might have already left. Is something wrong? I just wanted to talk to you one last time. To apologize to you. Achoo. With a small sneeze, Rachel shivered uncontrollably. Seeing her like that, I instinctively reached into my pocket for a handkerchief. Here, if you'd like. What? If you don't dry off, you'll catch a cold. At least dry your hair and head home soon. David. Rachel stared intently at the handkerchief I offered, and when she looked up, she gave me a faint smile. You really don't remember me, do you? What? I remember. I remember you lending me a handkerchief just like this before. She began to recount her story. One day, as a ground staff member, she had a run-in with a difficult customer who berated her with cruel words. Although she somehow held it together at the scene, during the break, she couldn't hold back any longer and rushed to the airport restroom. There, she cried alone for a while. And then it happened. That's when I first spoke to you, David, the company's famous captain. Oh. Finally, the memory came back to me. On my way to a flight, I had almost bumped into a staff member running out of the women's restroom. When she looked up, her eyes were red and swollen from crying. Are you okay? Here, take this. Before I knew it, I had offered her my handkerchief. So, Rachel, you're that colleague. Still the same kind David. You'd lend me a handkerchief again, even after all I've done, even after I caused so much trouble. Her voice quivered, and tears began welling up in her eyes. They streamed down her cheeks as she stood tall and straightened her posture. That kindness you showed me back then gave me the strength to keep working. It became my anchor when I wanted to cry. And it gave me the confidence to keep smiling at work. Thank you, David. She paused, then softly added. And I love you, David. I'm sorry, but Don't worry. Thank you, David. I think I can finally move on now, and maybe find a new love. With a wistful smile, she turned and walked through the gate, disappearing into the night. After the lively banquet finally came to an end. As we saw Mr. Sullivan off at the entrance, Tiffany, standing beside me, quietly muttered. She really loved you, didn't she, David? What? Had she overheard my conversation with Rachel? I looked at her in surprise, and she returned my gaze steadily. I understand how she feels. What do you mean? You're so kind, David. It makes you wish that kindness was just for you, even if only a little. Does that mean? But you said you couldn't get married. Why do you think that, David? Tiffany kept staring at me intently, waiting for me to speak. It was as if what I was about to say had something to do with her future. I used to be in a relationship with someone. She was a flight attendant at the same company. We had even begun to imagine a future together, perhaps even marriage. She had been my greatest supporter as I worked to become a pilot. However, when I started working as a pilot, I overheard her talking to a colleague. She said if he hadn't made it as a pilot, I was planning to break up with him. What? I discovered she had only pursued me because I was a promising pilot candidate. That realization shattered my trust, and I ended the relationship. However, she absolutely refused to nod. They told me you might become a captain someday, so I'll never break up with you. I'm going to marry you. Even now. I can't forget the look in her eyes at that moment. It was so intense, it scared me. Eventually, my ex-girlfriend's behavior escalated to something akin to stalking. She followed me constantly outside of flights and attacked any woman who tried to approach me, even at work. This began interfering with my job. At that point, the company stepped in and terminated her employment. But even though she was gone, the fear she had etched into me didn't simply vanish. I'm afraid of women. I'm terrified that if I get close to someone again, they'll turn out like her. Just thinking about it makes me freeze up. That's why I don't think I'll ever be able to get married. The company I now work for doesn't have any female employees. That was another reason I accepted Mr. Sullivan's offer. I've come a long way since then. There was a time when I couldn't even hold a conversation or make eye contact with a woman. When I returned home in that state, I caused my parents a lot of concern. Especially my dad. He's probably still worried about me. That's why he keeps suggesting I go to group dates. Though I ended up running away early that day. But meeting you, Tiffany, that made it worth it. Meeting me was worth it? Tiffany's voice was calm, but her gaze held a certain seriousness. It was, I'm glad I met you. I'm glad I met you too, David. That's why. She extended a hand toward me. Can we start over? As friends. Tiffany. For now, that's enough. And someday, when your heart has healed, when that time comes, I hope we can think about the future together. I didn't know when that day would come. But as I hesitated, Tiffany shook her head gently. That's fine. Because, David, I'd been in love with you for 14 years now. What? Ever since we used to share lunch together, back in school. I thought that if I became a flight attendant, I could stay by your side forever. And now that I didn't, maybe we can find a new way to stay together. Saying that, Tiffany smiled brightly. Be my friend, David. Tiffany, Even now, looking into a woman's eyes still frightened me. But Tiffany's gaze felt different. It didn't scare me. Perhaps it was because she had been the only classmate to show me kindness back then. She had been my first love. Of course. Let's be friends, Tiffany. Maybe, together, I could overcome my fears. With her, I felt like I could face the future and take steps forward. I reached out and gently took her hand. The warmth of her touch was soothing, like a balm for my wounded heart. Having taken just a small step forward, we held hands and, at the same moment, shared a laugh together. After that, under Mr. Sullivan's orders, a thorough investigation into Stanley's conduct was carried out. It was revealed that he had been involved in inappropriate relationships with female employees, pinned his mistakes on subordinates, and used his father's influence to cover up his misdeeds. The list of his wrongdoings seemed endless. As a result, Stanley was fired. His father, Kenneth, who had shielded him for so long, was also dismissed from his executive position. The two of them lost their jobs simultaneously. It's Tiffany's fault. She wouldn't give in to me, and that's why I started acting out. Even so, Stanley showed no sign of remorse, and it seems his doting parents, who had always spoiled their only son, finally lost their patience with him. Learn some humility, they told him, effectively disowning him and sending him off to live with distant relatives. Stanley now works at a labor-intensive job, where neither his father's name nor his inflated lies can protect him. As for Rachel, who had once conspired with Stanley to win me over, she later visited the Redwood to see Tiffany. I'm so sorry for the rude things I said and for causing you trouble. After sincerely apologizing, she looked as if a burden had been lifted, her expression calm and peaceful. And in the end, Tiffany forgave her. And for now, she says her job is her true love. Occasionally, when she drops by, we cheer her on with the Redwood's famous delicious cuisine. Currently, at the Redwood. Welcome. Thank you for coming, and we look forward to seeing you again. The cheerful voice of the much-talked-about beautiful proprietress echoed through the inn once again. The restaurant was bustling with a crowd of customers, and the staff were scurrying about busily. It all began with that grand banquet. Airport staff who attended were captivated by the Redwood's cuisine, which was based on traditional regional recipes, and praised it back at their workplace. As a result, the dishes were adopted as first-class in-flight meals, drawing attention far and wide. Soon, People who enjoyed the in-flight meals, or even those who couldn't fly first class but still wanted to try the food, began making reservations one after another. This is how the Redwood triumphantly regained its position as a premier local dining establishment. Truly, thank you. Seeing Tiffany's eyes welling up with tears, I shook my head and said, "That's not it. It's not about me." Even in tough times, you and your team upheld the Redwood's traditions. And it's thanks to your perseverance, Tiffany. I'm sure your father would say the same. Yes. I'm sure he's smiling down from heaven. Smiling softly, she looked up at the sky. She seemed to have grown even more as the head of the Redwood. I watched her with pride swelling in my heart. And now, I am. Fuel load, check. Weight and balance, check. Flight route and alternate airport, check. Standing in front of the jet, with the dazzling morning sun illuminating the runway. I am dressed in a pilot's uniform, carefully going through the checklist. Judging by the clouds, the upper-level winds look a bit stronger than forecasted. "David, are you ready?" The voice behind me belonged to Mr. Sullivan. His cheerful expression made me smile as I nodded firmly. "Yes, I'm ready anytime. However, the wind might cause some turbulence. I'll make an announcement if needed. So please ensure your seatbelt is fastened. As always, your attention to detail is reassuring. I can enjoy my flight with peace of mind." Mr. Sullivan nodded in satisfaction. Currently, I serve as Mr. Sullivan's personal pilot, ensuring that the busy Mr. Sullivan is delivered to his destination safely and without fail. To achieve this, I conduct thorough checks of the aircraft and weather conditions every time. Additionally, I strive to remain calm and composed, no matter what happens, and yet. By the way, David, how are things going with the proprietress of the Redwood these days? That's. Caught off guard by Mr. Sullivan's words, I found myself momentarily flustered before departure. It's almost been a year now. Surely there's been some progress? Mr. Sullivan. Clearly enjoying himself, Mr. Sullivan pressed further with a mischievous grin. "Well, how is it going?" Taking a deep breath to calm myself, I thought of Tiffany, who radiantly carried out her duties as the inn's proprietress. Since then, we're dating, with the intention of getting married. This time, I was the one who proposed to Tiffany. The wounds in my heart had healed rapidly, thanks to her unwavering patience and kindness over the years. For 14 years, she never rushed me and remained a friend I could rely on. Now, step by step, we're moving toward a future together. Ah, I see. That's excellent news. I'm relieved to hear it. Mr. Sullivan nodded in approval, his smile broad and satisfied. Well then, let's get going. Yes. Taking a deep breath, I headed to the cockpit. As I lightly touched my chest pocket, I felt the handmade charm for flight safety that Tiffany had given me. She crafted it herself, praying for my safe travels. Come back safely. I'm always praying for you. That thought is always with me. Even if there's a vast distance between the sky and the ground, we are together. With that in mind, I grasped the controls, ready to take to the skies once more. Because of my poverty, people around me laughed at my dream, saying, "There's no way you can do it." Yet, I never gave up. I worked tirelessly to make my dream come true, and I succeeded because of one person who believed in me. You can do it, David. I choose to believe in the words of those who believe in me. And no matter what happens, I won't give up. Even if the path is long and winding, I'll keep moving forward, imagining a future where my dreams come true. The journey may be tough, but I'm certain that happiness is waiting for me in the future.